Hi, I'm glad you're here. Because today's story, it's not easy to hear. It's not a classic whodunit. It's not about a single criminal or a late night headline. This is about something much quieter, much closer. Something you've probably seen in your school, your workplace, maybe even your own hands. Vaping. For years it was sold to us as safer, cleaner, the better alternative. But behind the clouds of fruit-flavored vapor and slick marketing, there's a very different story, one filled with addiction, lawsuits, cover-ups, and young lives cut short. In this episode of True Crime Echoes, we're not just looking at the product. We're looking at the system that allowed it to thrive, the loopholes, the corporate strategies, the cultural blindness, and the real people who paid the price. This isn't just a health story, it's a true crime story. And once you see how deep it goes, you'll never look at a vape the same way again. Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Girl Who Vaped Herself into a Coma. The story I'm about to tell you still haunts me. Not because it's gruesome or violent in the way we usually think of true crime, but because it feels terrifyingly close, like it could be any one of us. It starts with a woman named Jordan Briel, 29 years old, Ohio. Just your regular young adult trying to make better choices for her health. And like a lot of people who've smoked since their teenage years, Jordan wanted to quit. She was ready to give her lungs a break, maybe take control of something for once. So she did what millions of people have been doing in the last decade. She picked up a vape pen. And she loved it. I mean, who wouldn't? It's convenient. It smells nice. It doesn't make your hands stink or leave ashes all over your car. Plus, there's a flavor for literally everyone. Bubblegum mango, mint blue raspberry. I've tried some myself. I get the appeal. But for Jordan, this wasn't just a phase. What started as a habit to help her quit smoking quickly turned into something else. Something darker, more compulsive. She began vaping around the clock, in bed, in the shower, in her sleep. She was reportedly spending around $500 a week just to keep up with her vape usage. $500 a week. Now let me pause right here and say this: when people hear that the judgment starts, how could anyone be that addicted? That's ridiculous. But honestly, that's the thing about addiction, right? You don't see the cliff until you're already falling off of it. At first, Jordan didn't even notice the warning signs. A little heaviness in her chest, a dry cough that wouldn't go away, fatigue. But it didn't feel serious enough to stop. Not yet. She visited the hospital multiple times thinking it might be bronchitis or maybe some mild infection. Each time she was sent home. No clear answers, nothing urgent, nothing alarming. Until May of 2023. Jordan's partner found her unconscious in bed. Black liquid, yes, black was coming out of her mouth and nose. She was gasping, choking, fading in and out, barely alive. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. When doctors scanned her lungs, what they found shocked even them. Both lungs were flooded. 2 full liters of fluid had to be pumped out. 2 liters. That's the size of a soda bottle. Of liquid. In your lungs. And according to doctors, this wasn't just fluid. It was vape juice. It was as if the vapor she had inhaled day after day, month after month, never really left her body. Her body was literally drowning in the residue of what was supposed to be a safer alternative. Doctors placed Jordan in a medically induced coma for 11 days. She survived. Barely. But her body didn't walk away unscarred. She now lives with permanent lung damage and a minor brain injury caused by oxygen deprivation. Her skin had turned gray. Her body swelled. She couldn't walk. And she said that when she finally regained consciousness, her first thought was, "I almost didn't make it." And she was right. Jordan later said, "My body was trying to force out the vape juice in my lungs. It was like concrete. It was pure black and bloody." That was her description, not mine. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Maybe this was just a one-off thing. Maybe her vape was tainted. Maybe she bought it off some sketchy website or gas station. Maybe she had an underlying condition. But here's the thing: Jordan wasn't the only one. That same year, cases of severe lung injuries linked to vaping started showing up across the country. Doctors started calling the condition a valley e-cigarette or vaping product use-associated lung injury. By the end of that year, over 2,800 cases had been reported. At least 68 people had died, and for me, that was the moment something shifted. I started wondering, how did we get here? How did we go from warning people about cigarettes, to encouraging them to vape, to watching them end up in hospital beds, full of black liquid and collapsed lungs? It felt like a modern tragedy no one saw coming. Or maybe no one wanted to see. So I started digging. I wanted to know who invented the vape pen, why, who profits, and what the science actually says about what's going into our bodies. And let me tell you now, the history of vaping is longer, stranger, and more disturbing than I ever expected. This isn't just a story about health. It's a story about corporate greed, failed regulation, and a long chain of people who tried to do the right thing only to be ignored, buried, or bought out. It's the story of a quiet revolution that promised safety, but came with a cost we're only beginning to understand. So buckle up. This is the dark history of vaping, and it all begins in 1927. Chapter 2. What even is vaping? Before we go deeper into the history, let's just take a second to get on the same page. Because let's be honest, vaping means something a little different to everyone these days. For some, it's a tool to quit smoking. For others, it's a habit, a trend, even a personality trait if you hang around certain corners of TikTok. But what actually is vaping? At its core, vaping is really just inhaling vapor, created by heating a liquid. That liquid usually contains nicotine flavoring and a base, typically propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin or both. When you heat it up, it turns into an aerosol, and then you inhale it through the mouth and into your lungs. And there are so many names for these devices: e-cigarettes, vape pens, hookah pens, e-pipes, mods, JUULs, puff bars. It's like a vape universe out there with a new brand popping up every week. But they all do essentially the same thing. They deliver nicotine, or sometimes THC, into your body in vapor form. No fire, no smoke. Just a battery, a heating coil, and some flavored liquid. That's it. Now, if you're like me, you probably remember the first time you saw someone vape. It felt futuristic. Like out of nowhere, people were suddenly walking around with these glowing USB-looking sticks blowing clouds that smelled like candy. And I'm not gonna lie, I thought it looked kinda cool. Like, okay, what is that? It smells like Skittles. Can I try it? But here's the part that really tripped me out. While it seemed like vaping was this brand new thing that just appeared around 2010, it's actually been around in some form for almost a century. Seriously, almost 100 years. It blew my mind. I mean, I used to think vaping was just this Gen Z thing, something that came out of the tech boom or Instagram culture. But no. Turns out people have been trying to create smoke-free inhalation devices since before sliced bread was even a household thing. And if you go all the way back, like way back, the story begins in 1927. A man named Joseph Robinson designed what he called a mechanical butane ignition vaporizer. Catchy, right? But before we jump into his invention, I want to pause and reflect on why this matters. We often treat vaping like a harmless trend, a better alternative, the lesser evil. But when something becomes that normalized, that mainstream, it's easy to forget it has a past. And every past comes with intention, with trials and errors, with hidden motives and missed opportunities. Understanding how vaping started and why it was created in the first place helps us see the bigger picture. It forces us to ask, was this always about helping people? Or did that story come later after the marketing departments got involved? So in this chapter, we're going to rewind, not to judge, not to scold, but to really see what led us to the world we live in now, where vape pens are as common as cell phones and nicotine addiction comes in rainbow-colored pods. Next up, the man who accidentally started it all, without ever intending to create a nicotine device in the first place. Let's meet Joseph Robinson. Chapter 3, Joseph Robinson, the invention that wasn't meant for smoke. So, let's rewind the clock. We're in the year 1927. Jazz is everywhere. Prohibition is still in full swing, and flapper dresses are shaking up polite society. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, a man named Joseph Robinson comes up with something that he probably never imagined would be linked to nicotine or addiction. Joseph was an inventor, not a doctor, not a chemist, not some rebellious cigarette hater, just a guy with a brain full of ideas. And one of those ideas was a device he called a mechanical butane ignition vaporizer. I know sounds like something you'd find in a steampunk movie, but here's the twist: his invention wasn't for smoking. Not even close. Joseph was actually trying to solve a medical problem. He wanted to create a way for people to inhale medication like for asthma or other respiratory issues without having to deal with burning herbs or harsh delivery methods. It was kind of like a primitive inhaler. He wasn't thinking about tobacco. He wasn't thinking about nicotine. He was just trying to help people breathe easier. Now that part really stuck with me, because when you think about the modern vape pen, what do you picture? A cloud of mango-scented vapor, a sleek little USB-shaped gadget tucked into someone's hoodie. The last thing most of us think about is medicine. But that's where it started. Joseph actually patented his design in 1930. And that patent, the drawings, the description, it looks shockingly similar to what we now call a vape pen. There's a chamber for liquid, a heating mechanism, and a mouthpiece. All the basic ingredients were there. But here's the strange part: Joseph never actually built the device. No one knows why. Maybe he ran out of funding. Maybe he lost interest. Or maybe he just couldn't convince anyone that vaporized medication was worth pursuing. Whatever the reason, his idea never took off. Not in his lifetime, at least. And honestly, I think about that a lot. How many inventions get lost in the noise because the world isn't ready for them, or because the people with the money don't see the potential? Joseph's vaporizer was decades ahead of its time, and yet it just faded. He never saw it on shelves, never saw it in hospitals, never saw anyone holding it to their lips, but his idea, his blueprint, would eventually come back. Just not in the way he imagined. And I wonder, if Joseph could see what vaping has become today, would he feel proud or horrified? Because the truth is, his invention wasn't born from addiction or craving. It was born from care, from a desire to make breathing easier, not more complicated. But like so many things in history, what starts with good intentions doesn't always end that way. Up next, we're going to meet the man who picked up where Joseph left off, except this time he wasn't just thinking about medicine. He was thinking about replacing cigarettes altogether. Let me introduce you to Herbert Gilbert, a man with a dream, a scrapyard, and a whole lot of cinnamon-flavored ambition. Chapter 4: Herbert Gilbert and the Smokeless Dream. Have you ever had one of those ideas that just consumes you like it keeps you up at night? You can picture it perfectly in your head. You know it would work. You just need someone, anyone, to believe in it with you. That was Herbert Gilbert. And honestly, I kind of love his story. It's tragic in its own way, but it also says so much about how the world works, or doesn't work, when it comes to invention, health, and timing. So let me take you back to the early 1960s. Herbert Gilbert was living in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. That name alone sounds like a postcard, right? I picture white fences, small-town barbershops, church picnics. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody. And Herbert, he was just a regular guy, a family man. He worked in a scrap metal yard, running his own small business called Gilbert Iron and Steel. Now, like most men of that era, Herbert was a heavy smoker. We're talking 2 packs a day. Every day. But at some point he realized this isn't sustainable. His health was slipping and he knew he had to quit. But quitting, that's never easy, especially when you're addicted to something that's literally designed to hook you. So he started thinking, what actually makes smoking so bad? It wasn't the ritual. It wasn't the nicotine, at least not directly. What Herbert landed on just from everyday logic was this: it's the burning, the combustion. That's what fills your lungs with tar and toxins. That's what coats your insides in poison. You light something on fire and inhale it. Yeah, it doesn't take a scientist to see how that goes wrong. And Herbert wasn't a scientist. He didn't have a lab coat or a fancy degree, but he had a scrap yard, a fridge, and a brain that wouldn't shut off. One day he was standing in his kitchen and remembered how tea is made, how hot water pulls flavor out of leaves without actually burning them. That's when it hit him. What if, instead of burning tobacco, you just heated flavored air, no smoke, no fire, just vapor? So Herbert got to work. He gathered materials from his yard, and eventually he built this sleek little black metal tube with a silver tip. It was battery-powered, and it could heat flavored liquid into vapor. No combustion, no ash, no smell. Just a smooth inhale of whatever flavor you wanted. And yes, it worked. He even developed his own vape juice way before that was a thing. Rum, mint, cinnamon. He basically made an entire menu of flavors. And when he took a puff, it felt like sipping a cocktail. He wasn't trying to replace a bad habit. With another bad habit, he was trying to make something better. He called it the smokeless. And in 1963, he officially patented the design. Now, here's where the story gets frustrating. Herbert believed in his invention. He knew it could help people quit smoking, maybe even prevent disease. So he packed up his briefcase and started pitching it to companies. Tobacco companies, chemical companies, even pharmaceutical giants. And they all said, no, not a maybe. Not a, let's think about it, just flat out rejection. Why? Well, part of it was timing. Back then, people still didn't think smoking was all that dangerous. The Surgeon General's report linking smoking to lung cancer wouldn't come out until a year later in 1964. So to a lot of folks, Herbert's invention wasn't just weird, it was unnecessary. But the other part? It was probably money. Why would a tobacco company help people quit when they could keep selling cigarettes forever? So Herbert's dream fizzled. His patent expired. His product was never manufactured, and the world just kept smoking, and that breaks my heart a little. Because he was trying, like really genuinely trying to help people. And in hindsight, he was decades ahead of his time. But history has a way of ignoring the people who were too early, too quiet, too ethical. Still, Herbert didn't seem bitter. In interviews years later, he said he was proud. Proud to have created something that even if the world didn't accept it, then might have saved lives in the long run. And honestly, I believe him. Because even though his invention never hit the market, it planted a seed. A new generation would come along this time with better tech, different goals, and a whole lot more ambition. And that's where things get complicated, because up next is the moment when vapor stopped being about health and started becoming a business. Let's talk about Phil Ray, NASA, and the first commercial push to get nicotine into vapor form, this time with corporate backing. Chapter 5, NASA Nicotine and the First Commercial Vape War. You know, for something that's marketed as sleek and modern and totally tech, it shouldn't surprise me that the next person in this story came straight from NASA. Yeah, that NASA. Let me introduce you to Phil Ray. Phil wasn't just any scientist. He helped get men on the moon. Literally. He was one of the brains behind some of the most advanced computing systems in the world. But here's the twist. Despite working in one of the most elite scientific environments imaginable, Phil was still a smoker, a heavy one. And by the late 1970s, he was tired of it. Tired of the smell, the hassle, the health risks. But more than anything, he was tired of feeling powerless over his own body. Now back then, the only real option for quitting was nicotine gum. And according to Phil, it sucked. No buzz, no throat hit. Nothing about it scratched the itch that smoking did. So he figured, why wait for someone else to invent a better option? He worked at NASA. He understood systems and design and efficiency. Surely he could come up with something. So Phil brought in his personal physician, a man named Dr. Norman Jacobson, and together they came up with an idea. A product that looked and felt like a cigarette but delivered pure nicotine vapor instead of smoke. They called it the Favor. Not flavor favor like do yourself a favor. Catchy, right? The device looked almost exactly like a real cigarette. Same size, same feel, same routine. But inside, it contained a piece of paper soaked in liquid nicotine. When you inhaled, it would release a puff of vapor, not smoke, into your lungs. Phil and Dr. Jacobson believed this could be a game changer. You'd still get that sharp hit of nicotine your brain was begging for, but without the tar, the carbon monoxide, or the thousands of other chemicals found in burning tobacco. It was, in their words, the nicotine fix without the death. And at first it seemed promising. They got the Favor patented. They got it on the market. They even ran ads in newspapers and stores with the tagline, "Do yourself a favor." It was the first commercial vape product ever sold in the United States. They were confident this was going to take off. But then, almost immediately, the FDA came down on them. They claimed the Favor was a drug delivery device, and therefore subject to regulation, which, okay, fair, I guess. But here's the messed up part. Cigarettes, which deliver nicotine, tar, and cancer, were still totally legal, totally unregulated in the same way. So why was this product, the one that was trying to offer a less deadly alternative, being shut down? Dr. Jacobson believed he knew exactly why big tobacco. He suspected, though, he couldn't prove that the tobacco industry had put pressure on regulators to kill the favor before it had a chance to succeed. Because if this product actually worked, if smokers could get their fix without buying pack after pack of cigarettes, that would be billions of dollars in lost revenue. And big tobacco. They weren't about to let that happen. Now it's worth mentioning the favor had some real flaws, too. For one, it tasted awful. Turns out, pure nicotine gets bitter fast, and if you've ever accidentally gotten vape juice on your tongue, you know what I mean. It's like licking battery acid. So, it wasn't exactly a pleasure to use. Even if big tobacco hadn't intervened, the favor probably would have struggled to survive on taste alone. But here's why it mattered. Phil Ray and Dr. Jacobson created a new demand. They introduced people to the idea that you could get nicotine without combustion, that you could quit smoking without giving up the ritual. They didn't just invent a product, they started a movement. And fun fact, Phil Ray was the first person to use the word vaping to describe the act of inhaling vaporized nicotine. So yeah, the term we all use now. That came from a NASA scientist who just wanted to quit cigarettes and couldn't find a better option. Let that sink in. But the favor disappeared almost as fast as it appeared. Rejected by regulators, ignored by most consumers, and completely drowned out by the dominance of the cigarette industry. Still, it left a blueprint. And over the next 2 decades, dozens of inventors would try to bring vaping back, each with their own twist. Most failed, until 2003. That's when one man, not from Silicon Valley, not from NASA, but from China, finally cracked the code. And he did it after something personal, something painful, something that would drive him to try and save other people from going through the same thing. His name was Han Lik, and in a lot of ways he changed everything. Chapter 6. Han Lik and the Invention Born from Grief. You know how sometimes it takes a tragedy to finally wake us up. We tell ourselves I'll stop next week, or I've got time, or it's not that bad, until suddenly it is that bad. And by then, it's already too late. That's what happened to Han Lik. Now, if you haven't heard of him, you should have. Because this man is basically the father of the modern vape pen. And unlike most of the stories we've talked about so far about patents and prototypes and marketing strategies, this one didn't start in a lab or a boardroom. It started in a hospital room. Han was born in China, where smoking was and still is massively common. At the time, there were over 300 million smokers in the country. It was part of the culture, a social norm. Han himself started smoking when he was still young. He'd smoke on the way to school between classes after dinner. It was just what you did. But everything changed when his father, also a heavy smoker, was diagnosed with lung cancer. And just like that, the whole image of cigarettes as this normal, casual part of life came crashing down. Han watched his father fade, and he couldn't help but see his own future in that hospital bed. That was the moment he decided he had to quit. He tried nicotine patches, you know, the standard route, but they didn't help much. Sure, they gave him a little relief, but they didn't address what a lot of smokers really crave, the habit. The hand-to-mouth motion, the deep inhale, that mental break, that moment of pause. He still wanted the feeling of smoking, just not the slow death that came with it. And then, one night, something weird happened. He went to bed without removing his nicotine patch and had the worst nightmares of his life. He woke up drenched in sweat, shaken, disoriented. And it hit him, patches weren't the solution. He needed something different. Something that mimicked the experience of smoking, but without the burning, the toxins, the damage. So Han, who by the way was trained in traditional Chinese medicine, started tinkering. And in 2003, he finally built it. A device that could heat liquid into vapor without combustion using a small electronic mechanism. He called it Ruyan, which translates roughly to like smoke. And it was brilliant. The vapor came from an ultrasonic atomizer, a little mechanism that used vibration, kind of like what's used in those jewelry cleaners you see on TikTok. Basically, it shook the liquid at such a high frequency that it turned into mist. When you inhaled, it felt smooth, clean, and it even had a tiny light on the tip that glowed red, just like a lit cigarette. That part's kind of eerie now, but back then it made people feel like they weren't giving up the habit, just changing it. At first, the Ruyan was only sold in China, mostly as a smoking cessation aid. But soon it started getting attention abroad, and by the mid-2000s the product made its way to the United States quietly, almost under the radar at first. But once it arrived, things moved fast. People who had never been able to quit smoking suddenly found a lifeline. People who didn't smoke started vaping out of curiosity. And before long, the Ruyan was purchased by Imperial Tobacco Group for $75 million. $75 million. Not bad for a device invented in grief. But here's the part that always gets me. Despite everything, despite inventing a product that changed the world and made him rich, Han Lik didn't quit smoking completely. He went back to cigarettes. Yeah. Even the man who invented the modern e-cigarette still struggled to let go of the thing he'd built an entire business around replacing. That hit me hard, because it shows you just how deep addiction can go. This wasn't about willpower or money or intelligence. This was about something emotional. Something psychological. Something human. And that's what makes this story so complex. Vaping wasn't born out of greed, not at first. It was born from a man watching his father die. From a son trying to change his own destiny. From grief. But as you and I both know, grief doesn't always keep control. Once vaping hit the US market, it exploded into something much bigger than Han Lik could have ever predicted. It stopped being a medical solution and turned into a billion-dollar business, with bright colors, bold marketing flavors like cotton candy and creme brulee, and eventually a direct pipeline to millions of teenagers. The next part of the story is where things start to spiral. This is when companies stop caring about health and start chasing profit. And if you've ever heard the name JUUL, you already know where we're heading. Chapter 7, JUUL. How a quit-smoking tool became a trend for teens. So this is where the story really shifts. Up until now, vaping had been mostly a niche thing, a tool, an invention rooted in loss or health or at least intent. But then came JUUL, and JUUL changed everything. Now, if you've ever been in a high school bathroom around 2018 or scrolled TikTok during that time, you already know the grip JUUL had on culture. It wasn't just a vape. It was a status symbol, a trend, a quiet rebellion disguised as a sleek little USB stick. But before it became all that, JUUL actually started as something, well, good, at least in theory. Back in 2004, two grad students from Stanford University, James Monsees and Adam Bowen, were standing outside having a smoke break complaining about how gross and inconvenient smoking was. The smell, the yellow fingers, the coughing, the social judgment, you name it. They were sick of being addicted to cigarettes, and like so many others before them, they thought, maybe we can come up with something better. But here's where they went further than most. They turned that idea into their senior thesis project. They started a company and designed their first prototype called Plume. And yeah, it kind of flopped. It needed butane fuel to work, and it would sometimes shock people when they used it. Not great. But the idea stuck, and by 2015 they rebranded and launched a new version. This time it was sleek, compact, rechargeable. It looked like a futuristic flash drive. It was discreet, it was modern, and it was called JUUL. And the JUUL wasn't like other vape pens. It used something called nicotine salts, which allowed it to deliver higher levels of nicotine more smoothly, without the harsh throat burn you'd get from earlier e-cigs. Translation: you could get a much stronger buzz much faster with less discomfort, and that right there, that was the hook. Now, to be fair, JUUL was originally intended to help adult smokers quit. That's what the company claimed, and maybe that's what the founders really believed at the beginning. But then, the marketing started. They launched campaigns that looked more like ads for iPods or Red Bull, bright colors, young, attractive models, social media influencers, even celebrity gifting like JUUL pens sent to Leonardo DiCaprio and Bella Hadid. They took out billboard ads in Times Square. They promoted flavors like mango cool cucumber and creme brulee. They created an image that vaping wasn't just healthier, it was cool, it was lifestyle. And let's just be real here, teenagers noticed. Even though JUUL claimed they weren't marketing to minors, their entire aesthetic practically screamed Gen Z, minimalist, trendy, pocket-sized, easy to hide, no lingering smell. I mean, I remember walking into a Starbucks and seeing a group of kids who looked barely 16 passing a JUUL around like it was gum. No shame, no fear. It was that casual. And the numbers. They backed it up. By 2017, JUUL had become the #1 vape brand in the United States. By 2018, the company was valued at $15 billion. Let me repeat that, $15 billion, all in just a few years. But with that rise came controversy, because it wasn't just former smokers using JUUL, it was kids, and not a few here and there. We're talking an entire generation of teenagers who had never touched a cigarette in their lives, suddenly addicted to nicotine through a mango-flavored pod. There were reports of middle schoolers hiding JUULs in their hoodie sleeves, high schoolers using them between classes, even during class. Parents had no idea. Teachers couldn't keep up. And slowly, the backlash began. Critics argued that JUUL had created a youth vaping epidemic, that it had used Big Tobacco's old playbook hook them young, hook them hard, hook them for life, but wrapped it up in prettier packaging. And honestly, it's hard to disagree. Because while JUUL was technically legal, and their website had those age verification pop-ups, let's be real, we all know how easy it is to bypass those. And even if you failed the age gate, you'd still get marketing emails. You'd still see the ads. And you could still walk into some convenience stores and find JUULs not behind the counter, but right out in the open. It was everywhere. And at some point, it stopped feeling like a quitting tool and started looking more like a calculated business move. Because once JUUL realized who was buying their product, they didn't stop. They doubled down. And maybe you're wondering, what were the regulators doing during all this? Well, eventually the FDA and state attorneys general stepped in. JUUL faced lawsuits, bans, investigations. They were accused of marketing to minors, underreporting risks, and downplaying the addictive nature of nicotine salts. But by then, the damage was already done. Millions of young people were hooked. Vaping was no longer a niche. It was the norm. And JUUL, they weren't just a company anymore. They were a symbol of what happens when innovation addiction and capitalism collide. Next, we're going to talk about what happened when JUUL finally got dragged into court and the larger fight that broke out across the country about flavored vapes, youth addiction, and the question, can you regulate something once it's already taken hold of an entire generation? Chapter 8, Flavor Bans, Lawsuits and the War Over Vaping. It's funny how fast things can flip. One year a product is everywhere in everyone's hands, in magazines in Times Square on red carpets, and the next it's public enemy #1. That's exactly what happened with JUUL. By the time we hit 2018, JUUL had gone from this innovative quit-smoking device to the face of a full-blown teen nicotine epidemic. And even though they denied it, even though they said all the right PR-friendly things, the numbers didn't lie. Young people were vaping. A lot. And it didn't take long for the lawsuits to start. One of the first big ones came out of North Carolina. The state's attorney general sued JUUL for allegedly marketing its products to minors using flavors ads and influencers that clearly targeted young people. And here's the wild part: they won. JUUL was ordered to pay $40 million into programs aimed at preventing nicotine addiction. They were also required to stop advertising near schools, and they had to stop misrepresenting the dangers of nicotine, which, when you really sit with that phrasing, misrepresenting the dangers of nicotine, it's kind of chilling, because that implies JUUL knew exactly how addictive their products were, and they still pushed it. But JUUL wasn't the only one feeling the heat. Suddenly, flavored vapes in general were being seen as the problem. Lawmakers started talking about banning mango, cotton candy, bubblegum, fruit punch, all the fun stuff under the assumption that those flavors were created to attract kids. And honestly, I kind of get it. Like, let's be real. You don't need to be a behavioral scientist to know that if you make nicotine taste like dessert, people are going to want to try it, especially younger people. There was even this moment when mint JUUL pods got banned. And I remember that specifically because mint was my go-to. I didn't care when they banned mango, but when mint disappeared, yeah, I felt that. And that's when it really hit me how attached we become, how it stops being just a little vape here and there and starts becoming your default, your pause, your stress relief, your security blanket. Anyway, the whole conversation around vaping got so intense that in 2022, the FDA actually banned JUUL from being sold in the United States. Completely. But then a year later in 2023, they reversed that decision, or more accurately, they hit pause. They said JUUL could stay on the market while they continued to review its application. And that back and forth, that's what this entire fight feels like. Messy, inconsistent, delayed. Because here's the thing, JUUL was just one company. Dozens, maybe hundreds of other vape brands had already jumped into the market, all offering similar flavors, similar devices, and way fewer regulations. Some sold on social media, some shipped directly from overseas. Some popped up in gas stations and convenience stores with no branding, no warning labels, nothing. And suddenly you didn't even need JUUL anymore. You could get your fix literally anywhere. Meanwhile, the marketing didn't stop. Even as regulators tried to crack down, vape ads were still showing up everywhere: Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, even Pinterest. There were even reports of vape companies buying ad space near schools and placing their products in teen magazines and music festivals. And it worked. Between 2014 and 2016, a study showed that 78% of middle and high school students in the US had seen at least one ad for vaping. 78%. And here's the part that really gets me: most of those kids didn't even know JUUL contained nicotine. They thought it was just flavored vapor, like steam, like a cool cloud, because no one was really telling them otherwise. And in a way, can you blame them? I mean, think about how vaping is marketed: clean, stylish, modern, sleek, not gross or smoky like cigarettes. It doesn't smell. It doesn't stain your fingers. It doesn't make you cough. And there's always that underlying vibe like it's the better choice. But better doesn't mean harmless. And what's scarier? We still don't even know the full extent of what vaping does to our bodies, especially long term. Because most of the people who started vaping in their teens, they're only now hitting their early 20s. We're still in the early chapters of this story. And honestly, it kind of feels like we're the test subjects. We are the first generation growing up in a post-cigarette, post-JUUL world, where vaping isn't just accepted, it's expected. But at what cost? In the next chapter, I'm going to tell you a story that shook me. It's not just about marketing or lawsuits or trends. It's about one woman whose body completely shut down because of her vaping habit. And she's not the only one. Chapter 9: When the Lungs Collapse. The story of Seema Herman. There's something about hearing a personal story that makes everything hit harder. You can read the data, follow the headlines, even watch interviews with experts. But it's not until you hear someone say, "I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying," that it really sinks in. That's exactly how I felt when I came across the story of Seema Herman. She was 18, bright, beautiful, vibrant. Just a normal teenager living in California. And like a lot of teens her age, she vaped. A little here, a little there, after school, at parties, while doing homework. It started casually, until it didn't. Seema had been vaping for about 2 years. She started at 16, mostly with flavored pods, mango mint strawberry. It wasn't cigarettes. It didn't feel serious. And honestly, nobody around her acted like it was a big deal. If anything, it was trendy. Normal. And honestly, I get that. That's how it feels when everyone's doing it. It's just part of the background noise of being young. But then came August 2019. Seema started feeling a little off. She had trouble breathing, felt weak, and couldn't stop coughing. She figured it was a cold or maybe a bad reaction to allergies. But it kept getting worse. Soon, she couldn't walk across her bedroom without gasping for air. Her chest felt tight. Her lungs felt heavy. And by the time her parents rushed her to the hospital, her oxygen level had dropped to 37%. That's barely compatible with life. She was immediately put on a ventilator. Tubes down her throat. Machines doing the work her lungs couldn't. And for a moment, doctors weren't sure if she was going to make it. She had no prior conditions. No asthma. No history of lung problems. The only thing in her medical history that stood out: vaping. When she woke up in the ICU, she was terrified. She didn't even remember the ambulance ride. All she knew was that she couldn't move, couldn't talk, couldn't breathe on her own. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't some abstract consequence. This wasn't something that happened to other people. It was her. Seema made a promise to herself right there in the hospital. If she made it out alive, she was going to tell everyone what happened. And she did. She went public. She spoke to the press. She showed photos of herself on the ventilator. She described how she used to go through a full JUUL pod a day, sometimes more. How she never thought of herself as addicted until she tried to quit and couldn't. Her story went viral. She became one of the first real faces of vape-related lung injury, a condition that doctors later identified as EVALI e-cigarette, or vaping product use-associated lung injury. That year, in 2019, over 2,800 cases of EVALI were reported across the United States. 68 people died. Many were under the age of 25. And what's terrifying is that most of them, like Seema, didn't think they were doing anything that dangerous, because that's what vaping does so well. It lulls you into this false sense of safety. It doesn't smell like smoke. It doesn't burn your throat. It comes in a fun little pod with a fruit logo, so your brain doesn't sound the alarm until it's too late. And Seema wasn't alone. Around the same time, I remember reading about a 17-year-old boy from Michigan who had to get a double lung transplant after vaping destroyed his lungs beyond repair. The surgeon said his lungs looked like chewed up gum, blackened, shredded, completely useless. At 17. What struck me most in all these stories wasn't just the medical horror, although that's terrifying on its own. It was the pattern. How many of these young people said the same thing: I didn't think it was dangerous. No one told me this could happen. I thought vaping was safe. And that makes me angry, because somewhere along the way that message was allowed to spread, that this was clean, modern, harmless. And companies profited from it, while teenagers like Seema paid the price. The truth is, we still don't know what long-term vaping does to the human body. Lung disease, heart problems, neurological effects, we're just beginning to understand the damage. And yet, millions of people are still vaping every day. Because it doesn't feel dangerous. Until you wake up in a hospital bed with tubes down your throat. Seema's story is a warning not from a scientist or a parent or a policymaker, but from someone who lived it. And it begs the question, if the face of this crisis looks like an 18-year-old girl with a collapsed lung, why are we still calling it harmless? In the next chapter, I want to dig into that question, because this isn't just about nicotine anymore. There's another layer: THC vapes, black market cartridges, and a shadow industry that exploded alongside JUUL. And that's where things get even darker. Chapter 10. The Black Market Cloud. THC cartridges, counterfeits, and the hidden danger. There's a point in every story where the line between risk and recklessness gets blurry. And for vaping, that moment came when people realized you could fill those little cartridges with anything, not just nicotine, not just fruit-flavored vapor, but THC, the active compound in marijuana. At first, it felt kind of revolutionary. You didn't have to roll anything. No smoke, no mess. You could just take a hit from something that looked like a flash drive and be high in seconds. For people in states where cannabis was legal, THC vape cartridges became an instant hit. Fast, discreet, odorless. You could take a puff at a party, at a concert, even walking down the street, and no one would blink. But here's where things turned dark. As demand exploded, black market suppliers saw an opportunity. Why go through the hassle of regulation and testing when you could whip up something in your garage and sell it on Instagram? That's what they did. And suddenly, a wave of unregulated counterfeit THC cartridges flooded the streets. They looked identical to the real thing. Same packaging, same branding. Some even came with fake QR codes and lab test stickers. But inside, God knows what was actually in them. One of the most common ingredients was vitamin E acetate. Now, to be clear, vitamin E is fine on your skin. It's in lotions and creams. But when it's inhaled into your lungs, it turns into this sticky, greasy substance that your body has no idea how to break down. It coats your lungs like honey. Thick, suffocating, irreversible. And in 2019, it started killing people. Young, healthy people, some who'd never even smoked cigarettes, were suddenly showing up at ERs gasping for air. Doctors were baffled. Lungs filled with fluid. CT scans that looked like chemical burns. Patients who were coughing up blood and collapsing in school bathrooms. All of it traced back to one thing: black market THC vapes. I remember the story of Daniel Wakefield, a 20-year-old from Utah. He was athletic sharp in college, the kind of guy you'd never expect to end up in the ICU. But one night after hitting a vape he bought from a friend of a friend, he started coughing uncontrollably. His chest tightened. Within hours, he couldn't breathe. They found lipid pneumonia in his lungs, fat-based substances literally clogging his airways. He survived, but barely. And he's just one of hundreds. At the peak of the crisis, the CDC reported over 2,800 hospitalizations tied to EVOLI, that same lung injury we talked about in the last chapter. But this time it wasn't from JUULs or flavored nicotine. It was from counterfeit weed cartridges, some of which were made with pesticides, cutting agents, even hydrocarbons used in car wax. Let that sink in. People were inhaling car wax into their lungs just to get high. And here's the scariest part a lot of them didn't know, because these vapes were being sold in friendly packaging names like Dank Vapes, Cali Plug, Smart Carts. They looked colorful, safe, even fun. And some kids genuinely thought they were buying legit dispensary-grade products. But there were no rules, no testing, no oversight, just dealers chasing a quick buck, often using TikTok and Snapchat to move product. This wasn't just a health crisis, it was a criminal industry. A perfect storm of greed, ignorance, and desperation. And the victims, mostly young, mostly unaware, mostly trusting, and honestly, that's what haunts me. Because when we talk about true crime, we're usually talking about one person doing something horrible to another. But in this case, it was an entire underground system. A pipeline of people making money off of harm. Every fake cart pressed. Every label copied. Every cartridge filled with poison and sold to a teenager. That was a choice. Made over and over again, and for some families, those choices were deadly. I think of Olivia Friedenberg, just 18 when she passed away. She had dreams of being a nurse, she loved to paint, and one hit from a counterfeit THC vape put her in a coma she never woke up from. No one talks about these kids. They don't make headlines anymore. But their names matter. Their stories matter. Because this wasn't just an accident, it was the direct result of a product with no regulation, pushed into the hands of people too young to know better by people who knew exactly what they were doing. So where do we go from here? Well, that's the big question. Regulations are tightening, but black market vapes are still everywhere. And the line between legal and illegal, it's thin. Sometimes even dispensaries are caught with fake or contaminated stock. And unless you're a chemist with a lab, how would you ever know? In the next chapter, I want to talk about what comes next. Not just the policies, but the cultural shift, the way young people are starting to rethink vaping, and the way some former addicts are turning their pain into activism. Because while this story started with smoke and mirrors, maybe it doesn't have to end there. Chapter 11. From Addiction to Advocacy. When survivors speak out. There's something powerful that happens when pain turns into purpose. We've spent the last chapters diving deep into the mess, the lies, the marketing, the black market greed, the lives lost too soon. But here's the part that sticks with me most. Some of the very people who were hurt by this epidemic are now the loudest voices fighting to stop it. I want to talk about that. Because for all the headlines, the lawsuits, the bans, and policy debates, none of it hits as hard as hearing someone stand up and say, "I almost died." And I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. That's exactly what Sima Herman did. You remember her from Chapter 9, the 18-year-old who woke up in the ICU, barely able to breathe after vaping destroyed her lungs. After she recovered, she didn't just move on with her life quietly. She didn't fade into the background. She started speaking out. She gave interviews. She shared photos of herself on a ventilator. She went to schools and told students what it actually felt like to suffocate from something that had once felt so harmless. And you know what, it worked, because teens listen to other teens, Not warning labels, not politicians, not FDA fact sheets, but real people who look like them, who sound like them, who've lived it. Then there's Zane Opal. He started vaping in middle school. By high school, he was using nicotine salts every day, constantly chasing that buzz even during class. He didn't even realize how addicted he was until he tried to stop, and his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a pencil. Zane eventually quit. But instead of just celebrating quietly, he turned his experience into a full-blown campaign. He launched peer-led workshops at his school. He worked with local health departments, and he even helped create short films to raise awareness about youth vaping. This kid wasn't even 18, and he was already doing more than most adults I know. There's also Lila Gordon, who lost her younger brother to a black market THC vape. She went from being a college student studying fashion to testifying before Congress about the dangers of unregulated vape products. She didn't want to be an activist. She just didn't want another sibling buried before their 21st birthday. And the thing is, these stories, Seema, Zane, Lila, they're not rare anymore. They're rising. Across the country, a quiet army of survivors, siblings, and former users are stepping up. Not because it's easy, but because they know what's at stake. And honestly, I think that's what might change everything. Because laws help, regulations matter. But what really turns the tide is culture. When vaping stopped being cool not because a parent said so, but because a friend collapsed at a party, that hit different. When schools started having peer-led panels instead of just suspensions, that made a difference. When influencers started saying, hey, I vaped for years and I regret it instead of pushing discount codes for flavored pods, that's when the cracks started to show in the illusion. And it is an illusion. This idea that vaping is harmless, that it's just smoke without the smoke, that it's a safer option with no downside. That illusion has been sold to us for over a decade. But people are waking up. And for some, that wake-up call came in the form of an ICU monitor. For others, it came in a funeral home. But for the rest of us, maybe it's coming right now. In conversations like this, that's why I made this episode. Not because I have all the answers, but because I've seen what happens when these stories are left untold. I've watched classmates get hooked. I've watched TikTok promote vapes with glittery transitions and fake smiles. And I've seen the silence that comes when someone ends up in the hospital and nobody knows how to talk about it. So maybe this is how we start. By talking, by sharing, by remembering that behind every JUUL pod, every cloud of mango-scented vapor, there's a real person on the other end of it. Someone with a family, a future, a body that can only take so much. In the final chapter, I want to pull it all together, where we've been, what we've learned, and most importantly, what we still have the power to change. Chapter 12, The Aftermath and What Comes Next. It's strange how something that started so quietly, a new device, a sleek design, a puff of vapor, could leave behind so much wreckage. Over the past hour, we've walked through the rise of vaping, the science, the marketing, the lawsuits, the victims, the voices, and now we're here, in the aftermath. So, what happens next? It's easy to hope that the worst is behind us, that bans and public awareness campaigns have already done their job, that maybe, just maybe, people are waking up. But the truth? It's not that simple. Vaping isn't going away. Even with regulations tightening, even with lawsuits piling up, it's still everywhere. At gas stations, in music videos, on college campuses, in bedrooms and backpacks and bathrooms. And honestly, it's not just teenagers anymore. More and more adults are picking it up. Some trying to quit smoking, some just curious, some bored. And every time a new product hits the market, whether it's rechargeable, disposable THC infused, or flavored like watermelon ice, the cycle starts again. And we're still playing catch up. The laws are slow, the science takes time, but addiction, that moves fast. And that's what scares me most. Not just the nicotine, not just the health risks, but how normal it's all started to feel. We've normalized it so much that the line between choice and dependency has started to fade. People say things like, at least I'm not smoking. Or it's just vapor, it's not that deep. Or everyone's doing it. And I get it. I used to say those things too. But the more I learned, the more stories I heard, the harder it became to ignore that uneasy truth: vaping might be the cigarette of our generation. Slicker, cleaner, but no less destructive. And just like tobacco in the past, it's become a battleground one where profits and public health are constantly at odds. So, what can we actually do? I don't have a perfect answer. But here's what I do know: we can start by being honest with ourselves, with our friends, with our kids, about what vaping really is, what it can do, and how easy it is to fall into, and how hard it is to climb back out. We can listen to the stories of people like Seema Herman Daniel Wakefield and so many others who nearly lost their lives. Not as horror stories, but as wake-up calls. We can stop pretending that flavored clouds and neon packaging are harmless fun. And we can demand better from companies, from lawmakers, and from the people who profit off addiction disguised as lifestyle. And for those of us who vaped or still do, we can offer ourselves a little compassion. Because this isn't about shame, it's about awareness. It's about taking back control. And realizing it's never too late to make a different choice. I think about the kids who are in middle school right now, scrolling TikTok, watching their older siblings vape, thinking it's normal, safe, cool, and I wonder what story will they be telling in 10 years? Will they be the ones gasping for air in an ER? Or the ones standing on a stage, trying to keep someone else from making the same mistake? That part, that's still unwritten, but maybe we can help shape how that story goes, by remembering what we've learned, by refusing to stay silent, and by choosing truth, even when it's inconvenient. Because behind every cloud of vapor is a choice, and behind every choice is a person, and every person, every story matters, especially yours. Script. So, where does that leave us? Maybe you've vaped, maybe you still do, maybe you've lost someone, or maybe you've just been watching all of this unfold from the outside, wondering how it got this far. Wherever you are in that story, you're not alone. And this episode, it wasn't meant to shame anyone. It's meant to wake us up. Because when the marketing fades and the flavors disappear, we're left with the truth. Vaping is not harmless. And the people who told us it was, they knew better. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Talk about it. Let it be the start of a conversation that's long overdue. And if you or someone you love is trying to quit, reach out. There's help. There's hope. And it's never too late to reclaim your story. Thank you for watching True Crime Echoes. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, behind every statistic is a human life. Yours matters too.